And how are my listeners doing? Well, you may have to adjust your volume because I am without my usual microphone. But anyways, we are indeed at Psalms chapter 54, verse 7. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed your Christmas. And I've been gone for quite a while myself. Verse 7. For he has delivered me out of all trouble, and my eye has seen his desire upon my enemies. Note, well, more than likely this was written by faith. He called those things that were not as though they were, and that day of victory ultimately came. Now, the setting of this psalm is aptly described. However, prophetically, it concerns the Messiah and the minority of all the Jews who will, in the last day, believe on him. Quite possibly even the 144,000 found in Revelation. Now, Jesus did ask for a just punishment upon their enemies. Being himself sinless as man and righteous as God, he can demand a fitting judgment. He claims a just sentence upon these convicted transgressors. Chapter 55. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and hide not yourself from my supplication. Notes, now this psalm right here was written by David during the time when his son Absalom and his most trusted advisor Ahithophel rebelled against him by seeking to take his throne and thereby turn the hearts of Israel against him. It was no doubt the most awful time of David's life, brought upon by some of his stupid choices. Okay? Well, it also portrays Christ right here, who was betrayed by his personal disciples and chosen apostle Judas. Okay? Turning the page here. But even though this psalm concerns David's time, still, it more so concerns the hatred and treachery which the Messiah suffered personally in the days of his flesh, and which he now suffers and will yet suffer in sympathy with his people. You can find that in Colossians chapter 1, verse 24. But how wonderful it is to see and be permitted to hear Christ speaking to his Father. The Gospels record the words and acts of Christ, and the Psalms reveal his prayers and his thoughts. You can bet every last dollar you have that these are the things that ran through his mind. Verse 2, Attend unto me and hear me. I mourn in my complaint and make a noise. Notes, the cry of the Messiah to God was because of the attitude of Israel towards him. He would come unto his own, and his own would certainly not receive him. And of course I'm talking about in most part. There were plenty of Jews who did believe in him. As a matter of fact, he had an entire crowd of people who trusted in him. But for the most part, his own did not receive him. That doesn't mean that Israel rejected him as a whole, because that's simply not true. But you can find that in John chapter 1, verse 11. Verse 3, Because of the voice of the enemy, because of the oppression of the wicked, for they cast iniquity upon me, and in wrath they hate me. Note, now even though this concerns David and those who would take his throne in his life, still in a greater way it concerns Israel, who hated Christ. Now, of course, the question is, why did they hate him? Well, they did so because their deeds were evil, and the flesh will always try to kill the spirit. Absalom and Ahithophel felt justified in their actions, strangely enough. David said, they cast iniquity upon me. They felt that because of David's sin with Bathsheba and against Uriah, that they not only could, but in fact should actually take his throne. They felt that they could do a better job, if you want to put it that way. Well, in the first place, David was, in God's great mercy and forgiveness, the same after his sin as he had been before. However, self-righteousness can never see this. In their minds, David had forfeited his crown and his place, so they did the stupid thing. They took matters into their own hands. They did not recognize God's mercy, grace, or love. They only saw their own jaded, selfish ambitions. Men would do well to heed the words of this psalm. If they, as Absalom and Ahithophel, deny forgiveness to David, likewise it will be denied to them, which kind of puts them on the same level and worse. And as stated, in its great fulfillment, this psalm speaks of Christ and his earthly ministry. David had sinned, so his enemies felt they had some great cause against him. Well, Jesus never sinned, so his enemies would manufacture deceit against him. As a matter of fact, they would use his reputation of forgiveness, actually, against him. I won't go into that, though. I'll cover that in the book of Matthew. Verse 4, "My heart is sore pained within me, and the terrors of death are fallen upon me." Notes, and who in the world could blame him? David felt this way at this lowest of times. In the greater fulfillment by the Son of David, he would in no way be at fault, and yet he would take all the fault unto himself, suffering the terrors of death as though he himself had sinned. Verse 5, "Fearfulness and trembling are come upon me, and horror has overwhelmed me." Notes, to fuel this fearfulness and trembling was the realization that he had sinned, and terribly so. He really knew he just blew it. True, God had put away his sin, but yet the nagging fear was there that perhaps God would allow Absalom and Ahithophel to have their way. And prophetically, Christ would enter into the same agony because he would enter into our place and position. That's the reason that he alone can be the true intercessor. Only one who had never sinned could fill this place, and Christ alone fits that description. We're really lucky to have him on our side, or us on his, I should say. Verse 6, "And I said, Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." Notes, now historically, you don't have to have the best eyesight to see it, but David is symbolized by the dove, but prophetically it actually is a symbol of God and the Messiah and even the Holy Spirit. The unnatural rebellion of Absalom and the treachery of Ahithophel foreshadows the rebellion of Israel and the betrayal of Judas in a strange way. Verse 7, "Lo, then would I wander far off and remain in the wilderness." Selah. Notes, now there seemed to be no answer immediately to David's dilemma. He's just basically saying, oh man, if I could just get myself out of this mess anyway, I would take it. Not necessarily the right attitude, but I can't blame him. Verse 8, "I would hasten my escape from the winds, the storms, and the tempest." Notes, now he said he would, but he actually couldn't. The only escape he ever found was in Christ, which of course Christ hadn't came and whatnot, but of course I'm talking about God in general. Verse 9, "Destroy, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I have seen violence and strife in the city." Notes, David prays that the excellent advice of Ahithophel will be divided. This prayer was answered in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 31. Verse 10, "Day and night they go about it upon the walls thereof. Mischief also and sorrow are in the midst of it." Notes, well, this refers to the leaders and the leaders of the plot to overthrow David and put Absalom on the throne. The truth of the matter is, Absalom would have been a much poorer choice as a leader because he had all that selfish ambition. Verse 11, "Wickedness is in the midst thereof. Deceit and guile depart not from her streets." Notes, now I've said it about 1,000 times, but deceit is Satan's greatest weapon. His ambition is to make people believe that what is of God isn't, and that what is not of God actually is. And he is very amazingly successful. I mean, not too far off, we've got an Antichrist that's going to appear on the scene, and the whole world is just going to be blowing kisses at him. They're going to think he's the real deal. And boy, are a lot of people going to be really stumped whenever he starts destroying people. Verse 12, "For it was not an enemy who reproached me, then I could have borne it. Neither was it he who hated me who did magnify himself against me, then I would have hid myself from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my guide, and my acquaintance." Notes. Well, David is speaking here of the betrayal of Ahithophel. In a greater fulfillment, it speaks of the betrayal of the Messiah by Judas. So when one reads the words of this 12th verse, one is actually reading the thoughts of Christ concerning Judas. And as far as verse 13 is concerned, the words equal, guide, and acquaintance, as applied to Judas, may be translated my chosen, for Jesus elected him as an apostle. My fellow tribesman, if you will, as Judas was the only member of the 12 who, like the Lord, was of the tribe of Judah. That's something that made Judas a little bit unique, even though he was a backstabber. And so it is. What a horrible fate that man suffered in the place known as Uncle Dema. Anyways, verse 14. We took sweet counsel together and walked into the house of God in company. Notes. Oh, man, you can see where this is going. Well, David here is speaking of the times that he went into the tabernacle to worship God with Ahithophel. For 3.5 years, Judas walked with Jesus. And this tells us that association, environment, and participation do not actually save someone. Salvation must come from the heart, and Ahithophel had not fully given his heart to David. Judas, above all, had not fully given his heart to Christ. Now, whether he did in his dying breath is really kind of up in the air. I certainly hope he did. But be that as it may, what's done is done. Verse 15. Let death seize upon them, and let them go down quick into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. Notes. Well, this is exactly what ultimately happened, very tragically. David could only say this by the Spirit of God, and thus, in reality, it is the greater Son of David who utters these words. In his perfection, he is qualified to do so, and unfortunately, he had no choice. Verse 16? As for me, I will call upon God, and the Lord shall save me. Notes. There is no other solution. And yet most of the modern church will go any other direction except for the one direction they need to go. Verse 17. Evening and morning and at noon will I pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. Notes. 3 times a day David would pray. Okay, just very quick side note there. Verse 18. Got a slight cough here. He has delivered my soul in peace from the battle that was against me, for there were many with me. Notes. Now the Lord assures David that he will deliver his soul. He has the peace that the victory will actually be his. The many of whom David refers are the host who are actually with God, as well such is available to every true believer and for all time. No problem at all. Verse 19. God shall hear and afflict them, even he who abides of old Selah, because they have no changes, therefore they fear not God. Notes. The unregenerated man and his stubbornness will not change. In fact, the truth is you really cannot change in any measurable way towards God unless you really truly turn to God. Most men won't do that because they have really no fear of God. Verse 20. He has put forth his hands against such as be at peace with him. He has broken his covenant. Notes. Whenever Ahithophel rebelled against David, he actually rebelled against God's chosen one, and thus he rebelled against God, and he actually broke a spiritual covenant that he had made to support David and the work of God. Well, Judas did the very same thing, and as you can only imagine, the results were disastrous. So horrible. Chapter 55, verse 21 is where we're going to have to pick up. Thank you, and God bless.